Hi, good morning.
Hi, good morning. This is Rebecca Bakelitz calling from ACDI Voca.
Hi, Rebecca. Welcome.
Thank you.
We're just getting started. A few more people should wander in shortly.
Okay.
I'm going to put you on mute just for 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rebecca. Okay, good morning, folks. This is Lori Starr. Christy is in Ethiopia today. I am the Senior Specialist for M&E. I also support Jen. I'm really glad you joined us today. Let's do a round of introductions. We have some folks on Adobe, we have some folks on the phone, and then we have folks in the room. So we'll do a quick round of introductions, and I believe we have a few more people from Save the Children who will be joining us shortly. So, let's start with those of you online, Lauren and Valerie. Oh, you may not have your mic set up yet.
Yeah,
okay,
Lauren
we'll start.
Just came online.
That's okay. So. Rebecca, let's go ahead and start with you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Bakelitz. I'm calling from ACDI Voca. I'm a Senior Project Coordinator. I support projects in Kyrgyzstan and the Philippines.
Great. Thank you. Chelsea?
Chelsea Reinberg with PCI, and I'm the Program Coordinator for Food Security and Humanitarian Aid.
Okay. We also have Lauren Galvin from PCI on the phone, on the Adobe Connect without a mic set up yet, and Valerie Rowe from CRS.
Okay. My name is Liz Drummond. I'm a nutrition senior specialist here at Save the Children, and I support some of the Title II programs as well as some of that.
Great.
Nicole Coglany from Food for the Hungry. I'm the Health and Nutrition Coordinator, and I support a variety of projects, including our DSAP in Ethiopia and Syria.
Okay, good. How many of you were at the last meeting? Too many pastries in front of you there?
I was.
Chelsea, Nicole?
I wasn't.
Okay, great. And I don't know, Lauren and Valerie, I'm not sure either. I was not.
Lauren and Valerie, just really quickly, because I'm not seeing any responses. Oh, Lauren, there you are. I'm glad that you can hear. So just to go over activating your mic really quickly, the directions are at the top. But if you see the phone, it's right next to the green speaker. If you click on that, connect my audio, then a window will pop up and select the use microphone on your computer device. And it works best if you have a headset. And then just click done and you should connect fine. And if you do that, then it will be nice because then you can speak out. It'll be a little bit easier for you guys to fully participate.
All right. So the last meeting explored gender context and how we, what type of information we need to gather around the gender context to support a good gender analysis. We'll build off that gathering today. My area of expertise is theory of change. I do all of the Tango Talks theory of change trainings. I built that whole curriculum. So this is I really am excited and a huge advocate of getting gender integrated into the theory of change. So Christy said, let's bring another piece in here and really start from the beginning. So we'll some of the discussion today, we're not going to limit ourselves to the context. We really want to look at the full picture. So we may be jumping ahead to what you'll cover in subsequent sessions. But I'm just interested off the bat, how many of you currently are working on a project that has a theory of change? Everybody in the room. Rebecca?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part. That has a what?
Oh, I'm curious about how many of us currently are working on a project that has a theory of change.
Okay. I don't think I do, actually. I used to, but my current projects do not.
Okay. All right. And online, you're voting. We have one, I guess, one of you, maybe the rest of you, if you don't have your mics activated yet, if you could just take that quick poll and let us know if you're currently supporting a theory of change. And in the room, to what extent do you think gender is integrated in the theories of change that you're working with?
To be honest, since I'm pretty new, I haven't been actively involved in the kind of the current ones, or I haven't fully been integrated yet with the process and program.
Okay,
stuff.
so you just don't really have an idea yet.
Right, no.
Okay.
I think it varies. I think some of them have done a better job than others, and I think sometimes even when it isn't necessarily integrated, it doesn't actually play out that way in the implementation. But yeah, so I don't know. I think it's pretty big.
Yeah, and that's a whole another topic about, right now we'll talk about theory of change design and at least getting all those hypotheses up there and hoping to get gender integrated, and then implementation, of course, is a whole nother discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Nicole?
I think always we start off with it as making sure it's integrated, but then it kind of gets to the side and then, let's push it back in. So, could use more direct integration.
Okay. And do folks on Adobe Connect, do you have your mics activated yet?
So it looks like
This is Valerie. Can you hear me?
Valerie, yeah, we do have you through the phone, yeah.
Okay, great.
But that we also have folks through Adobe Connect that is an online remote access. So I'm just making sure we have Christy from World Vision, Lauren from PCI, Valerie, CRS, and Sarah from, I believe, SAVE? Sarah Bowler? Anyway.
Sarah Valley, she's on Two from the Hungry.
Oh, she's from Hungary as well. Okay, great.
So Christy and Lauren, everyone will be speaking now.
Okay, for flow, I'm going to go ahead and just keep chatting and try to get your mics activated. It'll give the meeting a better flow, I think. So how many, if we're thinking about the theories of change, most of you have a theory of change. Is gender in there as a cross-cutting theme, or when you talk about integration, that can mean different things. So do you see gender sort of dropped into your theories of change as a cross-cutting theme, or could you describe what you mean by strong integration or moderate integration? And it's okay, those of you who haven't really looked at your project theories of change, that's fine. But Nicole and Liz, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think I've seen both. So some of our projects have addressed gender as just a cross-cutting theme, and it's kind of interspersed. And then some of them, and I'm thinking more about Solitude Portfolio, have them as a standalone kind of, purpose. And I think there's pros and cons for each. And I think, I think that actually how it's sort of included at the beginning and then into the results framework does affect how well it's integrated, whether it's sort of, I think sometimes cross-cutting gets lost because it's like cross-cutting, and then if you have it there that you have specific activities and goals, that's kind of what I've seen, is that when it's got its own place, it's much easier to really build those activities, and then they sort of build it across, whereas if you kind of just got it as a cross-cutting theme, it tends to get lost, even though it's important regardless of how you structure it into the kind of, again, I could go into implementation, but that's just,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, for those of you through Adobe, forgive my typing. I'm trying to take notes and hold the meeting at the same time, but the spelling will probably not, it'll probably be about the level of a 7th grader. Yeah. So I would agree with you. When we just drop gender in as a cross-cutting theme, which was the mode, I would say, when we were all first starting to create theories of change. It's like, let's just plop that little box about gender, similar in results framework. Cross-cutting theme right at the bottom, big long box, and it gets lost. It gets forgotten. It's not prioritized. So ideally, what we want to see is gender peppered throughout the theory of change. We want to be able to demonstrate that the project wants to reach women, that it wants to, women and men and boys and girls, and that it wants to benefit both sexes, and it wants to either transform gender or empower or impact both sexes. So that's the focus of today's talk, is how can we make sure that gender is really integrated and not just dropped in as a cross-cutting bubble in the theories of change. We have a new attendee here. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Jerusalem Kasama, and I work here at SAVE in the Food Security and Livelihood Department.
Okay, and your name?
Jerusalem?
Jerusalem.
Yes, like
okay.
Jerusalem.
That's great, Jerusalem. Okay, I'm just going to write it down phonetically. Okay. So let's think more. So one point we have is contributing to strong gender integration is that cross-cutting can get lost. If gender has its own place, it's easier to focus on. What else? What else might contribute to strong gender integration in the theory of change?
Hi, Lori. This is Christy from World Vision.
Hi, Christy. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Yes.
Thanks. One thing that I've seen.
Yes, Rebecca?
Christy.
Oh, Christy. One thing that you've seen.
Okay, it's okay. One thing that I've seen is for better integration with our programs is if we start out at the very beginning of the design, looking at the theory of change, but also just what we want to be doing with a gender lens, so that we're constantly looking at every piece of putting the project together through a gender lens. That seems to help our projects seem to come out more integrated rather than just the disaggregation here and there as needed.
Okay. And when you say what you want to be doing, are you speaking of the activities and the interventions?
Well, I'm speaking from the very beginning when we start with our Theory of Change workshop and just really focus on having a gender lens at that point. And then as we go through the design, looking at the log frame or the project design, the results framework, depending on whatever donor we're working with, just really taking that gender lens into that to begin with rather than focusing on our activities at first.
Right, great, okay. Other comments? Well, let me ask you this. To what extent, so building on Christie's comment here, to what extent are gender staff integrated in the theory of change design process from the beginning, in your experience?
This is Valerie from CRS. So the few projects that we have had a theory of change in, we have either had our
You?
yeah, in the few projects that we have theory of changes in, we had our which is we've had our either our gender advisor for the project be part of that group, or a gender advisor at the regional level has been part of those workshops.
Okay, from the design workshop, right, though? Is that what you're talking about, at the design workshop phase?
Yes, so from the design workshop, we always have either the regional gender advisor, which is for our one region has a gender advisor, or someone from our headquarters be part of that in the design workshop. And then when they've had theory of changes workshops, which I guess my experience has come from a couple of years ago when we had a round of the Burundi, Madagascar, and Malawi proposals, where the design the theory of change came after. But during the theory of change workshop, we also had our gender specialists in that meeting.
Okay, so gender specialists are involved in theory of change workshops. So I think we've all, I mean, in the early days of having theories of change in Food for Peace funded programs, this was the mode, right? The theory of change came after project design, but that I hope we are all in agreement. That is like completely backwards. The theory of change needs to drive our project design, not vice versa. That was a way of, I guess, transitioning into having a theory of change. They were requiring it. Food for Peace was requiring a theory of change, but nobody really knew how to do one. So the projects were designed, and then these workshops were held, and the theory of change was designed to fit the project. But that's completely backwards. So moving forward, what I want to talk about today is how can we get the gender advisors and gender staff integrated from even before the design workshop, so that gender is, as Christy mentioned, it's present. It's not an afterthought. It's not we come in afterward and we try to fix the theory of change and pepper it with gender, but that we really are there from the beginning. We are incorporated in all of the pieces of the puzzle that lead up to a good theory of change, and that hopefully should result in models that have gender better represented than now. So that we heard from Food for the Hungry. Anybody else want to speak about the extent to which your organization's staff are integrated into the whole process of theory of change?
My experience in a lot, I mean, this isn't just at SAVE, in other organizations that I've worked for, is that there's not necessarily always a gender advisor, but it's just that assume that technical staff who contribute to the proposal process have gender experience, and I think how much gender experience the technical staff have can kind of influence that. So when you've got really strong gender people, then that comes out, and then when you don't, it is sort of this afterthought, and you'll get someone coming in like inserting and avoiding, you know, like say the children, you know, sort of all things about children, but you know, sometimes it's just sort of added on at the end. So again, I think it depends on the technical depth of the gender staff at any given organization. That would be possible in my experience.
Okay.
I mean, unless you someone like
Does that sound familiar to folks? Rena, you've got Sarah Borger online. Does that sound familiar to you? I know your mics aren't activated yet, but yes, a no. Hi, Krista. Hi. Yes, with an exclamation point.
Also,
again, just really quickly, because a lot of people...
Sure. We're going to
Sorry.
take a moment. Sorry for the interruptions here, but because we have so many people through Adobe Connect, we'll take a moment
Yeah.
to try to get mics
A couple people joined.
flowing and have a meeting that's easier for you to just speak up as if you're in the room.
So I know 3 of you guys have your mics activated already, but at the very top of your screen, next to the green speakerphone, it looks like, there's a phone. And if you click on that, it says Connect My Audio. And then if you select the Using Microphone / computer device, and then click Done, that will connect your microphone, and you'll be able to speak out whenever you like.
Thank you, Lauren. So I think just to break a short meeting, a 2-hour meeting into bite-sized pieces, I'd like to explore 4 areas where I believe it is critical for gender staff to be involved in the process. And that is the initial phase. This is when the draft RFA drops, right? This is long before a design workshop. And that is in the gathering and the organizing of the evidence base that informs the theory of change development. I also think that we need to probe ways that your gender staff can be more involved in the problem analysis, to be there to identify problems that disproportionately affect one sex or the other. Somebody mentioned getting that gender lens on the process. Gender staff need to be there to put the gender lens on the causal linkages, right? And this is in the problem analysis. This is even before the theory of change develops. Determining the pathways of change. Again, ensure that gender focus is there. Ensure that we have projects that are reaching women and that your theory of change model demonstrates that. The model demonstrates that the project will benefit both sexes and will either empower or impact or somehow transform gender. So there's sort of a tier of, we often get the reach piece, right? We get it in our activities, who are we going to touch? But in the theory of change models, it falls out in the boxes that show outcomes. The gender lens falls out, particularly when one sex is disproportionately affected. So that'll be sort of the themes I want to explore with you. And so moving on to the first question about gathering that evidence base, right? You talked about context in the last workshop. A few of you were here. Chelsea was certainly here. I'm not sure how many others online, but you agreed, it was in the notes that Christy sent out, Christy Tabai. You agreed that the context was multi-layered, it was multidimensional, that we had national policies and cultural norms, and there's all kinds of information we need to gather about the context, and you agreed that it wasn't just the responsibility of the gender staff to gather the gender context, right? That the gender staff may need to oversee it or work with each technical staff, but it was a job of everybody. Everybody needs to contribute to gathering information about the gender context. So aside from the context, which in theory of change models is typically the very bottom tier, it's those broad trends that you mentioned, policy and law and environmental trends and so forth, basic demographics. But there are all kinds of other gender information that needs to be gathered to inform a theory of change, to inform the initial development. So what other kind of information do we need to gather, right? I mean, I want to talk about that first before we just talk about the extent to which gender staff are involved in getting this evidence base. What else has to be gathered? That's okay. That's fine. We've got Valerie on. Valerie, I think you're the only one on the phone. What other kind of information does CRS gather about gender outside of context?
Well, we gathered data from secondary sources, but we also gather information regarding each of the gender analysis domains relevant to the area that you're working in. So we use secondary literature for that. I just one question. You're
Right,
hearing me
and
through the phone
specifically about
through Adobe Connect, because I didn't sign up on the phone. So I want to make sure that you guys aren't getting an
Adobe
echo.
Connect.
Oh,
We are hearing you through Adobe Connect. It's coming through the phone on our end.
Okay, sorry about
right,
that.
so no problem. Liz, you had something to add.
No,
What specific kind of information? You were very specific in the last meeting that you want to grab, you want to gather information about gender-sensitive information, about cultural norms, national policy, partners, stakeholders, environmental trends, and how they affect gender. So that is the broad context. But when we get into the nitty-gritty, what other kind of information are we gathering about gender that we need to understand about gender?
I mean, would you consider, well, no, I guess I just wondering what the difference between, like, that contextual information and other information would be if it's all providing information on the context. So, if it's stuff about, like, what really household practices are or what's happening in the community or what those barriers for, women accessing resources.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wouldn't put that into the context, but that is absolutely right. The access to and the quality of assets and resources. What else?
Well, I just think those things that affect, I mean, as you pointed out, like, what are those things that are disproportionately affecting women? Or, like, if we're thinking about a Child 2 program, like, we want, I'm a nutrition person, so I always think about that, but, like, from the health and nutrition perspective, we want women to be accessing health services during pregnancy and providing appropriate care to their infants. So, what are the barriers that prevent them from doing that? And then I guess if you take that to the livelihood side, the same thing. Like, so those are all, like, what's going to stop them from achieving their goals in the project?
Right. Christy, I'm going to hear from some folks online. We have Lauren and Sarah and Christy, I think, who all have mics activated. We maybe need information about social capital, right? Linkages to local government, various levels of government. We want to understand gender as it relates to coping strategies. What are some other things we would need to understand to build a strong theory of change?
This is Krista. I switched to the phone.
Great.
One of the things that I am doing often when I'm looking at an RFP is I'll do the general context, but then I've got to go into, what's specific to the country, what's specific to the project or the problem that we think we actually want to address. So if that is, goat vaccination in wherever, then I need to understand, who is making what decisions around different kinds of livestock and mobility and who pays for things.
Okay, absolutely. Any information related to the problems that you've identified, right, and how one sex may be disproportionately affected. It might be the means of making a living. It might be how they invest. It can be access to all kinds of resources. So I want to understand the extent right now that the gender staff are a part of gathering and organizing this evidence base. There's a lot of information that needs to go in to build a strong theory of change for a proposal, right? Not post-award, but for the proposal. So to what extent are gender staff right now in your organizations involved in gathering the evidence or, designing the tools to gather it, maybe not physically gathering it, and then also organizing it so that we understand gender trends?
Just really quickly, online, Sarah Bowler said that services around protection as it relates to gender is also very important. For your last
Absolutely.
comment.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sarah. So right now within your organization, right, our focus today is how can we make gender better integrated in our theories of change. So I want to understand the extent to which gender staff are actually contributing to, you know, driving the evidence that's gathered and then organizing that evidence.
I wonder if the better question is, how many organizations actually have dedicated gender staff? You know, like, as opposed to just portions of the time.
Well, that's certainly, we can ask that question. How many of you do? How many of you have dedicated gender staff?
Do, but they're not always involved in all the proposals. The last design workshop, DSC design workshop that we had, there was a local gender staff, but there was only one, so it was a little less, and she was the only woman in the room.
Okay. Jerusalem?
Yeah, we don't have a specific gender advisor in my department.
Okay. Christie says World Vision does.
World Vision does.
Dedicated
Valerie,
gender staff.
also, feel free to speak out. I saw that you were raising your hand. I'm not sure if you wanted to speak out or if there was something else. But if you do, just please feel free to speak up.
So we have two.
This is Rebecca
level
from
gender
HCDI
advisors.
Voca.
Sorry.
Valerie, could you go first? And then Rebecca, you could follow. I think both of you were trying to speak at the same time.
Okay.
We have two headquarters gender advisors for CRS, and then depending on the country program, there could be a country program level gender advisor, or there are those who have been trained on doing gender analysis and helping to think about how you integrate gender into the design of a project. So it varies because we have about 50 or 60 offices. So some offices have gender advisors and some don't.
Okay. And
This is Rebecca from HCDI Voca. So at headquarters here in DC, we have, I think, about 2 or 3 people full-time on staff, solely working with gender across all of our projects. And then we also have, I think, 2 regional gender specialists based, I think one's in East Africa and one's in West Africa. And then on each of our projects, we make a point to have at least one, if the position cannot be a full-time position, gender specialist, then we often will have either an M&E person or somebody else on the project staff be the gender focal point for that project.
Okay. And Lauren from PCI brought up a good point here, that our gender advisor is very involved on the ground collecting primary data, but one person is not enough. So whose responsibility is it to collect all this other data? What are your suggestions? Liz has raised the point. We seldom have, some of us may not even have dedicated gender staff. Organizations that do have a small gender staff. So who should be gathering all of this data that we talked about, the coping strategies, the access and the quality of assets?
I think with anything, I mean, it's a team. Not one person is doing the nutrition component, not one person is doing the health component. I think that it's easy to say that one person should be assigned to it, but in all reality, we know that it's a team effort, and in order to get it accomplished and finalized, you have all hands on board for every piece. So I think it's important just to keep that in mind, that even for the gender, it's a team effort.
Is Rhea in agreement there? Okay, Rena, the question on the timing of when this information needs to be collected. So I think that's a great question, Rena. I imagine it's when the project is staffed up. So I want to know from you, how common is it for you to wait, or your organizations to wait till the project is staffed up, or until the gender, it's time for the gender analysis? Is that what typically happens? Is that when all this data are collected and analyzed?
Lauren Galvin just had a comment.
Right. Okay. I think we all are pretty much in agreement that that leads need to be sensitized. It needs to be a team effort. One person, two people can't do it. We'll get back to that, but we had Rena raise the question about timing, and it's a very important question. Does this happen? Do we gather all this information once the project is staffed up, once you've received an award? Again, in the context, this conversation is about developing a theory of change. That theory, a strong theory of change, needs to be put forth in the proposal, right? So pre-award. So how many folks, this is okay, this is all, we're sharing, we're learning here. How many, is it common for the gender, all of the gender information to be collected after the award or when it's time for the gender analysis? Or do any of you, some of you mentioned, I've got to go back here, that you did collect information to inform the design of the theory of change.
We did. We also had partners, local partners that assisted that because they knew the context a little bit more, but they weren't technically understanding. So
Okay.
It's, that question. It's kind of, the health and nutrition team kind of coordinated more with the local partners to develop the gender-related things. And we did have gender advisors on the ground, but this is one person again. So group effort, I think, is the answer to that. But.
So Valerie here conducts a literature review during the proposal phase and integrate gender into the assessment for the proposal, and sometimes a separate gender analysis during the proposal phase. This would be best practice, right? If you want a theory of change that stands out as having gender integrated when you submit that proposal, the point Valerie raised here is best practice. I get it that we don't always have the staff, we don't always have the budget, but this is best practice. And so we want to find ways to make sure that we do put the gender lens on our analysis before the award and before it's time to do the Food for Peace required gender analysis. That gender lens should be front and center from the get-go. When your teams decide we're going after this award, the gender staff should be brought in. How many of you collect primary data? Hi, Sarah. To inform an award. Valerie's mentioned they sometimes conduct separate gender analysis. So just any kind of primary data to inform. Okay, I think we all do lit reviews. Some of us are able to get out into the field and conduct some primary data. This is an entry point. When we went back to I'll go back on the screen here, one. When we get back to these areas here, the areas where gender staff should be involved, is gathering and organizing the evidence base to inform the theory of change development is critical. You want gender to pop out on that proposal. You don't want to wait to get awarded and then come back in and have to go through it and doctor it up to be gender responsive and gender aware. So how can we achieve this? How can we make sure that we get a gender lens on that initial data collection, secondary or primary, and the organization of the information? We recognize it's got to be a team effort. What are some other techniques that some of you have used?
And I think one thing is that it has to be prioritized, and it has to be prioritized to make sure that all team incorporate it into a proposal so that it's talked about and it's highlighted.
And does that happen in your organizations?
I haven't really been involved.
When the technical teams gather, do we bring in our gender advisors?
Yeah. And at least in the livelihoods department too, all of the technical advisors in their different specialties, we're sort of tasked, and it's understood that we have to be on top of the gender aspects of what we do, whether it's value chains or agriculture or youth employment. So we don't leave it to just one person, but each technical advisor also has that responsibility.
Okay. Those of you on the phone, Valerie, Rena, Christy, anybody else on?
One thing that World Vision's done is we do have our gender advisors as part of our technical specialist team, but then for the design workshops, I would assign someone other than the gender specialist who would also be in the design workshop, but someone else that would just be there to make sure that gender is incorporated through every piece. So, they'd just be raising their hand throughout the whole design workshop. And how do we make sure gender is in this? How do we do this? Is gender incorporated this way? Are we missing something? And then they also are the person that when they review the proposal, they're only looking at the gender piece to make sure that it's integrated throughout.
And that's a great point to be made, because I've attempted other ways as well, like pointing someone specifically to look at gender, but I've also done a route where we've kind of trained staff, and then literally 2 days later going through a proposals process and having people from other technical backgrounds, ag, nutrition, ERR, and having them, as they were kind of fleshing out with their theory of changes, what they wanted to do, thinking about these different components, asking them to look at the gender aspects. And that experience was not as fruitful because what I've learned is that people go back to what they're comfortable with, but they also get the topic that they have the training in and the knowledge in is what they go to first. So having them trying to think back to incorporating gender into that thought process kind of gets put to the sidelines because they get excited about the other work that they're doing. So having someone dedicated, even if it's not a gender specialist, but someone dedicated to think about, are we raising gender, is really important, because when it's part of someone else who's working on an ag component or a nutrition component, it does get lost.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Do gender staff or those or technical advisors with some gender expertise, are they reviewing your tools before primary data collection? I've got nods in the room. Is it common for gender? We had a comment about the gender advisors come in and review the proposal before it's submitted, but I'm going right back. I'm going much further back, even before the design workshop. Again, the purpose of getting a good, strong theory of change. And this is about gathering an evidence base and gathering the information and organizing it. So Sarah Simons is saying, yes, our gender advisors look at the tools for primary data collection. How about other organizations? Our gender leads taking a look. The ag staff is getting ready to go out. The health and nutrition staff is getting ready to go out and collect some primary data to inform this proposal. Do we put the gender lens on those tools? Do we help define the structure of what kind of literature will be reviewed and what kind of information we need? I see Sarah nodding. Christy says yes. Okay, so we've got two among about 12.
I'd say yes, but it's not consistent enough.
Not consistent, okay.
So we try to break down our research questions into men, women, boys, girls. If we're looking at cash crops, we try to always ask that question. In fact, some of our tools even have columns, like, are there cash crops that the women focus on, that the men focus on? Does that change?
The data collection tools these sound like organizing tools that help you bring in that data and then look for trends.
And we've had some really good gender advisors or consultants that helped us break down those questions from the hypotheses to the actual research questions to the focus groups or one-on-one interviews that break it down by gender and age, depending on the topic, if necessary.
Okay, that's a great practice there.
They're not templates yet, which would be great, so that we could apply them to anything, but we've got them.
So some of you, I know how many of you have gender frameworks or use another gender framework as a guiding light? Yeah, I see some nods. So this is, and Valerie, I'll take a moment to read this in a moment. using a framework, I mean, gathering primary data of any kind, not just gender, but it should be guided by a framework. It helps you figure out what you know and what you don't know. It helps you make sure you're gathering a comprehensive data set. So when your staff are reviewing the tools or setting up a plan for gathering secondary literature, recognizing gender staff can't do it all, find a framework that speaks to you. Find a, Krista Jacobs had mentioned, we need to understand the problem. What do we want to know about gender that might affect this problem? So using your gender framework, you can review those tools, making sure, here's the one from UN Women, right? Making sure you know, what men and women do and where these activities take place. This is similar to what Sarah said. This is just one gender framework. We have CARE's empowerment framework. This, let me use a little pointer here. This is their framework, but it's coupled with a nice matrix that says, what do we mean by agency? So when we're reviewing our tools, if this is our guiding framework, we make sure we're getting information about self-image, self-esteem, legal and rights awareness, marriage, whatever's important to our framework. We have the USA Gender Framework, right? Something to sort of help us remember the comprehensive palette of how gender affects these very complex problems, and make sure that we're trying to get information in all these areas. Again, these aren't, I'm not advocating you use any of these frameworks, but I advocate you use one. If it's your own, I mean, if it's your own gender framework, that's fine. If you want to choose the USAID one or UN Women, but find something that helps you put a scope on what type of information you want to gather. They're also great for using a framework helps you analyze the data and organize it. If you, maybe the gender staff are not the ones specifically analyzing the data, but setting up something, again, like Sarah Simons mentioned, here's a data synthesis tool, right? We have a comprehensive contextual information, livelihood assets. Over here we have relationships with government, we have social capital, we have strategies, but we have the male and female perspective. Now these data may be sorted in many ways to inform a theory of change, but somebody needs to take a look at the male and female perspective so that we can understand who may or may not be disproportionately affected by certain problems that are identified. So that's, I think, one thing that would really help to get these theories of change, to have a stronger demonstration of gender in these initial theories of change. You'll revise and you'll perfect and you'll tweak those theories of change after your gender analysis because you learn so much more then. But finding something to say, okay, we could collect so much information, let's narrow it down and figure out what do we want to make sure to collect. So I don't know if folks are using maybe other tools. Do you have other tools that we could share with one another for analyzing gender? Here's another one. Let's see this. This is just we're looking at asset quality. Who has access to a particular asset and what is the quality of that asset, right? And this can be quite revealing if we look at, okay, over here we've got, you know, men and women. Men have better access to fishing waters. Women have decent access. But we look at the quality of, oops, I'm sorry, let me get the pointer here, right? I'm right down here, guys, online. Okay, the wildlife, men, women have at least, you know, decent access. Women have access to wildlife and fishing waters, but the quality is really poor for women. This is Zambia data, where because of women's mobility issues, they were restricted to the fishing waters that had been overfished, were polluted, contaminated, right? So yeah, they could fish if we just look at access to this asset, but the quality of what they had available to them versus male fishing waters was stark. So as much as possible that we can get our gender staff or technical staff with gender expertise involved in helping, setting up tools so that we look at the data before the problem analysis and organize it in a way that we see gender trends. I mean, we're off to a much better start than we are right now. One thing is getting the data, but then organizing it so that you can see the gender trends and you can pull out those problems. Yeah.
Lori, just real quick question. Whose tools are these? Are they
These
kind
two,
of combination?
this is a tool, let's see, these are Tango's tools, which we are happy to share. This is a standard, for those of you who don't know, my background is all evaluation, so this is a very standard first crack at, when data come in from the field. This tool is used to synthesize all that data. This one I think might be based off of a CRS or CARE tool that has been adapted by Tango. But I encourage us, how many of us have tools similar tools that help us organize data to see gender trends?
I think in the past we've just used other kind of best practice tool stuff that's available through talks.
Yeah, we should compile a toolkit, right? So share these tools, and but I'm not sure. I don't know where I don't think they're located anywhere.
The Gender and Resilience Working Group is working on a task very much like that. It's not just tools for gender analysis, but it's tools related to gender and any aspect of resilience programming. So,
right.
And we're actually precisely just now, we've got a sort of an inventory that could be a mechanism we could use to compile and share the tools somehow. We're hoping to use TOPS as a repository as well, the FSN website.
Okay, great. So we'll find we'll get some links to the various tools. We'll get links to the Gender and Resilience group. Rena has a question. Curious to know if partners are using and adapting the Feed the Future gender integration framework. Folks, are you using and adapting? Yes.
Hi, this is Rena. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I just switched to the phone. I was having trouble with the webinar. I guess my question is, this is a great discussion. I'm just curious about the FTF gender integration framework. Like you said, Lori, there are many frameworks out there. This one speaks obviously to the FTF results framework. So it's organized by the results that FTF has. So it's more within the ag and livelihoods realm of an FFP project. But what I was curious about is we often find some of the frameworks that are out there sort of help you with the context, but then sort of moving to the theory of change, it's sometimes, I think, more useful to really delve into what the activities are and then, apply that gender lens at that activity level. And I've found that this framework forces you to think at that activity level. So I was just curious. I just wanted to provide a little bit more context to my question.
Sure. I'll wait for folks to respond, and I actually have something to add to that. Mm-hmm. Anybody using or adapting the Feed the Future gender integration framework?
No, I haven't even seen it. I think I need to.
Something to share. So, Rena, I would agree that perhaps post-award, when you are perhaps, great, thank you, Rena, for sharing that. Post-award, when you might be revising your theory of change, something focused on activities would be helpful, but when you're designing a theory of change, activity should be the last thing we're thinking about. Right? Mm-hmm. We need to go through the problem analysis. We need to find the causal linkages between these problems and then flip them into the causal linkages of results and outcomes we want to see. The very, very last piece of creating a theory of change is then selecting an activity or intervention that will set those wheels of change in motion. So I would argue against and I know you joined us a little bit late, but I would argue strongly against doing the analysis based on what activities you think you're going to do in an area if you haven't yet done a problem analysis that informs your theory of change. And that's what we're trying to move away from. I mean, very hardly moving away from picking activities and designing a program around them versus having an evidence-based problem analysis and a set of interventions that responds to that versus we do this really well, so we're going to do this.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
But
Lori, I guess there's different times for, I'm wondering if there's a way to organize the information, like what are some key questions that need to be asked at different stages, like that, the literature review during proposal stage for development of a theory of change. But then this type of framework might help people at the gender analysis stage. I just feel like it's all about timing and what types of questions to ask when to help hone the type of information that you're collecting at any given stage.
I heartily agree with you, and there are many nods in the room. It is all about timing. I would go back to, choosing a conceptual framework. If it's a gender framework or if it's a broader framework, but using something to help focus the type of information you want to gather in the beginning. You won't get everything. What you'll end up with is a lot of information. You'll end up with what you know and what you don't know. And I think the timing, as the program evolves, let's say we know a lot, we don't, we know quite a bit about gender, but there's quite a bit we don't know. You still get awarded. You have a theory of change where gender is fairly well integrated. You receive the award. You're going to focus on the what you don't know, right? The next stage of gathering information is what we don't know. We fill in some gaps. The next stage is what we still don't know, or new information has surfaced, and now we need to explore another line of logic. So it's iterative, and it needs to start with a foundation of what are the very basics of what we need to know. And then, I'm sorry, I'm getting news popping up on my screen. I think the timing, it will evolve, and you can bring in different frameworks as the program evolves. But the workshop just today, and it's a very short amount of time to talk about a complex topic, is about initially developing that theory of change and making sure that gender is well integrated in that model that you present with your proposal. Now that model will be modified 3, 4, a number of times over the course of your program's life as you get more information about the context, about the specifics. But just to start, we want to make sure that gender, that as Christy mentioned in the very beginning, that the gender lens is invited to participate, is actively participating from the moment your team decides to go after that RFA. My experience is gender staff, they're reeled in when they need to fix something, right? When they get a critique, the program is critiqued. Well, you don't have gender integrated very well. Oh, let's bring in the gender staff now. Let's, and then you're tasked with something just quite difficult to start doctoring a model that, you should have been invited to the table from day one. And maybe my experience is not representative of that, that of most organizations in the room or on the phone, but I think it's common enough I think it's common. Gender is not funded at the level it should be yet. So how do we advocate that, to get gender staff brought in from day one? Some of you are having, gender advisors review the tools. Great. Next step, get gender advisors in there, making sure that data are analyzed in a way that we see gender trends. So let's move on. It's 10 o'clock.
Lori, can I ask a question? Thinking of like proposal development phase, which I'm sure we're all about to be dived back into, given that it's almost a new year.
Yeah.
And I think one thing, when they think about these Title II programs is how much there is, and they're really complex, and Food for Peace wants a lot. And this year we saw a lot of stuff, not just gender. Obviously, that's I think always been important, but now taking into account youth components, and then climate change and resilience, and how to tie that all together when you've still got these sort of health and nutrition areas, you've still got livelihoods, you've still got resilience activities. And I'm wondering, do you think that the theory of change and the way that's presented and kind of outlined is really the place? I'm just thinking about it. There's so much that has to go into these proposals, and we only get 30 pages. That and we have to address all these concerns. That really the theory of change is where gender should really shine. And if you can address it really strongly and make it clear that you've really thought through the gender considerations and the issues, that doing it that way means that that's where it really should be built in. And then hopefully from that, it would just make sense that your whole proposal and all the activities you're proposing would be addressing gender, rather than kind of having to in every sentence be like, and addressing gender concerns. I feel like you're constantly writing that in there to make it clear, but if you could just make it really clear in the theory of change that's really had been clearly thought through, do you think that would be kind of not enough, because you still have to write about it? But I'm just thinking, is that the place to make gender stand out in a proposal, thinking about that proposal development phase?
It's an opinion, not an official
No,
statement.
yeah, I mean,
the opinion is that absolutely, if you can make gender, if you can show that you've considered gender in the reach and the benefit and the impact throughout your theory of change, I mean, that's what we need to shoot for. It definitely needs to be there. As far as whether it's enough, I can't answer that question. I don't know if anyone, Krista Jacobs or anybody else from the donor population, I would say it probably needs to be both, but I think with a well thought out theory of change that again shows where gender appears, right? It would be easier to write that bridge. It's easier to tell the story because it's very clear about where certain outcomes have, which are the outcomes should be a mirror of a problem, and if that problem disproportionately affects one sex, then that will come out in the story. It should help you write the first few pages. I call it the problem analysis, but it's, what is it, the context, whatever, the first 5 pages of your proposal, right? It should help tell that story, and then your theory of change and your solution would mirror that story. But
I think we, in the theory of change describing that, what we sort of struggled with in one proposal process I worked on was that it's dynamic, right? So you've got a gender situation, but as your program begins to have impact, like if you're supporting women with income generation activities to grow a crop and sell, the gender context changes because the men may become interested then in that crop and want to take it over and take over the income. So there's the scenario, the environment is constantly shifting as your change process occurs, and that's very tricky to figure out how to write about it, but also because you're going to have multiple solutions depending on what happens, and also visually to depict it in the theory of change. I know we talked about this aspect a lot, like how to, because it's a theory of change is sort of, it's a process through time, but your proposal is sort of like time static in a way.
Well, your proposal is static, but in the process of modifying your theory of change, which should take, at least for Food for Peace funded projects, should take place every year, that would be a place to address it. we have new problem, right? And if there's a new problem, there needs to be a new solution.
But we also have that responsibility of identifying the unintended consequences as much as we can, from the beginning. And sometimes you can ask local staff, like, if this happens, what do you think is going to happen? But it's tricky to weave into, like I said, a 30-page proposal.
Folks online, do you have comments?
This is Krista. Sorry, I had to step away for a little bit, so I just came in about 3 minutes ago, maybe.
Enough to hear me call your name and say, what do you
Yes.
think, Krista?
I was like, I'm back. Hold on. So I think, I agree, Lori, with what you're saying about, seeing gender throughout the theory of change and throughout, the proposal. Yes, as hopefully if, you're going through a project, resources will change, benefits will change, and that will have gender implications. I wouldn't really expect anyone to be completely prescient about that in their proposal in terms of, being able to say how you're going to deal with every contingency that might come up, but more be able to say, here's, how we're going to look for different changes. Here's what we think those changes might be. Here's are some ways we could address them. And, here's how we will, be doing that in our, regular work planning or in our program management. So yes, it's, it's dynamic, but I think you can plan for that in the proposal and more describe a process of, being able to say, well, these are the things that we think we need to look for, and here's why, and here's how we know that. Here's how we're going to do it, and here's how we'll adjust. We don't know what's going to happen, but having an idea, being able to say what you're going to anticipate and how you're going to look for it, I think is the way to go.
Thank you. Other comments online? Lauren from PCI asked about, do folks recommend developing a separate gender-specific theory of change in addition to integrating gender into the larger project? What has been your experience? Are any of you doing this, developing a separate gender-specific theory of change?
No, and I can say that for not just gender but other sectors as well, we tried to do separate theory of change and then combine them, and that doesn't work very well. So I don't know if, it didn't work very well for us, I should say. So I think it was, in our experience, it's been easier to involve things there.
Sue? Or no? Valerie?
I think one theory of change is difficult as it is. What the comprehensive one is.
Lauren, I'm not sure what to say about that. I'd have to see an example of where it might help. I do think you run the risk of losing the cross-sectoral. I mean, we're moving away from these linear models to non-linear and cross-causal linkages, and it might be difficult to keep both models up to date with changes. I could see the utility of perhaps a gender theory of change that's more like an organizational strategy, because there are many theories of change. The ones we're speaking about today are a development hypothesis, right? But there are many other less detailed, there are many types of theories of change, and gender-focused theory of change for organizational strategy and what are we moving toward, I would advocate. That's a great question, and I think it takes some more thought. So let's, we're just a bit after 10. Let's talk about the problem analysis piece. We have our data. We've collected, let's say, data that we've got some good information on gender and context and we've organized it, we can see trends. Now it's time for the problem analysis. And I am a believer that a problem tree is absolutely fundamental to theory of change development. I don't really see how you can create a theory of change without a problem tree. The data you're gathering is an evidence base on, challenges within a community. We also have opportunities, but you're there to solve problems, right? You're looking for solutions to problems. So it needs to be focused on a problem analysis first. And if you have a problem tree that has very strong causal logic, it's real simple to shift it into a theory of change that also has strong linkages between the outcomes. You avoid that risk of starting to insert outcomes that aren't really related to any evidence-based problem. So do folks right now, do you use problem trees to, okay, good. I see a lot of nods. They kind of faded. They went out of vogue for a while, and I do know organizations that jump right into their theory of change, which I think is dangerous because you get those comments back from Food for Peace. Your theory of change is not related to your problem analysis, right? But if you create a problem tree and you just flip it to the positive, you invert it, right? You won't run into that problem. So this usually takes place several weeks before your design workshop. You would not be creating a problem tree in your design workshop. It would be several weeks to a few months before. And I encourage advocating a problem tree if your organization isn't already doing it. We'll take a look at this. We'll take a look at a real crummy one, and then we will look at one that has a better gender focus. So here's a problem tree.
Strawberries are great flip by the end.
I hope it pops up. Let's see. Well, Lauren, any suggestions? Something's not, it's not displaying.
Do you want it to be full screen?
I just want to see it.
It's displaying on my screen.
It is?
Yeah.
Is it displaying on your screen? Folks online, do you see a problem tree?
Yeah. So
Okay.
You might have to just log out and log back in. This happened for Valerie earlier, and she logged out and logged back in, and then she could see it.
Okay. Apologies. I'm going to have to log out and log back in. Oh, maybe something's happening here. The folks in the room can't see the problem tree. Apologies, folks online.
Can you just open the file since we're all looking at that screen?
This?
No, like if you just open it from your desktop.
Yeah.
We're looking
That's
at
a good idea. No,
Oh.
no, that's a much better idea.
What's missing?
Let's see here. Okay. Thanks, Liz. Okay, so if we take it, here's a problem tree. What do we see? What are the problems with this problem tree? Right, a gender. We want it to have a gender focus, right? We want to understand which problems disproportionately affect males or females.
So I don't see anything that's indicating like which problems are, I mean, I don't see any coding or anything that says like this is a big problem for women, this is a big problem for men, it's not.
Okay, so there could have been coding if one was was a gender sensitive. It could be coded in color. Okay, all right. What else?
I don't see any mention of gender, gender inequality.
I don't see any mention of gender anywhere, right? You don't see gender, right. Okay.
Like not even like low maternal, like on the nutrition side, like which would be a problem in itself is low maternal, poor maternal nutrition during pregnancy. Like that's not even an issue.
Yeah, and no maternal health at all in the nutrition.
No one's getting dietary diversity.
Okay, so let's look at a better example. And I'm sure we can find ways to tear it apart as well. But I'm going to put this at the big screen. This is, can those of you online see this well enough? And Lauren, I have okay, yeah, okay, everybody can see it. All right. So what do we see here? This is a problem analysis that will inform our theory of change. Right? Our impact group is rural households. So if any of these problems disproportionately affect a smaller group, a subgroup of rural households, right, it should stand out. Let's put our gender lens on and see. We can, usually you read a problem tree from the bottom up. So what do you see here?
It's got more nuance than the previous one.
Okay, more nuance. Any other comments? So we're highlighting gender, like in some places. Oops, can't move my little marker here. Let's see. The marker's not moving, but if you go to the bottom left, right, we have statements like gender inequitable. We've managed to call out that in this specific problem, there is limited access, and it's gender inequitable. It's probably affecting women, but in our narrative, we would be able to say, we know that one group is disproportionately affected. We also are using, let's see, can I move this now, Lauren? Yeah, I can. Sometimes we call out women, especially women. Limited adoption of alternative livelihoods, especially women. Right? This doesn't mean that males aren't affected, but it means that when we have come up with a solution, we're really focusing on women. What are some other ways in your problem analyses that you've called out gender, that you've made it very clear that there are problems that disproportionately affect one sex or the other? What kind of wording have you used? What can, Sarah mentioned color. Like maybe we could put a border around some of these or shade it differently that says, wah, wah, okay, this is a problem. We have, inequity here in some way. What else?
We've also done MWBG, like men, women, boys, girls. So putting, like we had an exercise where we had our problem tree on the wall, we had to go put stickies up where we thought it affected men, women, and then if it was relevant to boys and girls, or and they'll use, or if it was only 3 of those 4 or 2 of them.
Okay.
So that you could really see how it was distributed.
Right, and so I will argue that if it's affecting all 4, you don't need to do anything because that's your impact group, right? It's only when there's a subset, and I really like Sarah's idea, when they're doing their problem tree on the wall, if it's affecting men, women, girls, or boys, if any group other than all 4, note it, right? So you can call it out. What are some other techniques you've used in your problem analysis? In this problem tree, gender stands out. It's a neon light.
We didn't eventually depict it in our final problem tree that was in our proposal, but we did an exercise where we tried to weight. So we looked at all the problems and put like stars, 1 star, big gender, low gender problem, 5, this is a really important gender problem.
Okay, so just any kind of coding, right?
Yeah.
Any kind of coding.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I advocate, again, because when I teach theory of change, it's about flipping this model. We'll see how we will take, limited adoption of alternative livelihoods and say increased adoption. We just flip it, and then we have our theory of change. So I like getting the text in your problem tree, because if we've identified, we have an evidence base to show that one sex is disproportionately affected, and we get it in writing. When we flip this to the positive, we've still captured. We don't lose the stars or we don't lose the coding. It's right there, and it'll stay right there.
Krista has a comment, and for them, sometimes even when women, men, girls, boys are affected, they put a star or something if we have a reason to expect that they will be affected differently in a way that differs from the problem.
Okay, great. Great tip. Any other tips that we can share with one another? Are gender staff routinely involved at this stage in your organizations? Or is this something that we should advocate for? Are you brought into the problem analysis? Yeah, I see a nod.
Problem analysis, yes, not necessarily the creation of it.
Okay. So, Nicole has a softer voice, so I'll
Sorry,
repeat it.
I said that definitely in the problem analysis, and then not always in the TOC. Sometimes it's health and nutrition or whatever side kind of speaking that voice again through, but not always just gender.
Okay. So, and that's another way, reason to advocate for this. If you do a problem tree and you flip it into your theory of change, not that I advocate gender not be involved in the theory of change, but if you're involved in this stage and we use these points you've brought up, the stars of how people are affected differently, the coding, the language, that theory of change should show gender with or without your representation in vetting it. Until we get to the point where gender staff and advisors are routinely brought in to vet and help create that theory of change, this would be a good process. So any other comments before we move on to this next question? Any other comments about the problem analysis and the extent to which we can include our gender staff? Okay. So moving to the theories of change, again, it's just an inverted model of your problem tree. The things you want to focus on are the reach. I'm going to put a little model up here that Nancy Johnson over at IFPRI had a model like this recently in a workshop, and I told her, oh, I love that so much, I'm going to use it in a number of discussions. But when we're reviewing, hers was not related to theory of change, but it makes so much sense. So when we're reviewing our pathways of change, get this on here, we need to think about these. Oops, it's not letting me paste. Okay, I'm just going to put here reach. It's actually, Lauren, it's not letting me type at all. Okay. Any idea why that is?
I think it's just...
Okay. Yeah, but it's not letting me paste. Let me see.
You can't paste images.
Okay. So reach, benefit, and then transformation or empowerment, impact. These are opportunities when we review that theory of change, we want to make sure that we're touching on these points. And let's just look at a theory of change model here to talk about what we mean by this. Okay, those guys are seeing it. Lauren, since my screen isn't working, can you make that full screen? And for those of us in the room, I'll go to this image. So the reach, I think, is where gender advisors are typically brought in, and that would be down here in the bottom, if you can use the arrow. The hexagons, right? The reach is simply the activities, the interventions where we call out that we are reaching women, men, and youth, that we state our trainings will be gender responsive. We use words, like gender equitable, gender inclusive, what else? What else can really call out gender in the bottom? I'm looking at the bottom tier now, right, the hexagons. This is about the reach. These are the interventions that set the theory of change in motion. So what other, words in a very small little shape can we use to highlight gender?
Well, if you're really looking at changing and shifting norms or behaviors, then transformative.
Okay.
Or you could just talk about shifting and changing norms, behaviors, identify what, depending what the activities are.
Right. You could, okay.
That you're looking at.
Could you give an example?
Yeah, so
We have to state these. In our theory of change, we have to state these as a result.
Yeah, so
So
if you really want men to increase their acceptance of women's use of family planning methods, productive.
okay, good. And now, I'd put that up there as an outcome, right? If we
Yeah.
shift, there we have an outcome
Yeah, you're right.
that would
It's really
benefit
an outcome.
everyone. So that's great, because that is one of the areas, the reach, the benefit, and the impact. So, so other language that we can use, of just maybe talking again about the reach down here at the bottom, the reach meaning the interventions. Who is this project touching? Because that's the first piece you want to get in there on gender.
You mean staff? Are you talking about the beneficiaries?
Well, in a theory of change, this bottom tier will be your intervention output. So it always needs to be stated as a result. Blah, 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 trained, something formed. I mean, it's this bottom tier is always stated as a result. And that with the theory being that if we achieve this output result, the next tier is set in motion. If, for example, starting at the bottom in the left-hand corner, if women, men, youth, and male and female youth are trained in entrepreneurial skills using gender-responsive methods, then we will see increased and gender-equitable access to entrepreneurial and technical training. Right? If we have an indicator for increased and gender-equitable access, we should be able to show that men, women, and male and female youth are achieving. So, okay, so by reach it might be a lot. If some of you don't have like intense theory of change background, maybe I'm putting too much on the table right now. But just remember, so first here, when you're reviewing your theories of change, try to ensure that the reach is there, that it's called out, that we don't just have statements like trainings to establish VSLAs conducted, but that when it's appropriate, you call out gender if it's necessary. You call out where, using your stars, using your problem analysis, where gender surfaced, you call it out in the reach. Now the benefits, sometimes gender, what was already in that problem that now flips into an outcome, say increased and gender equitable access to entrepreneurial technical training. If you recall in the problem, that was, limited and gender inequitable. So that one flips on its own, right? We've already got gender in there. But sometimes you want to add more to show that we will have gender integrated in this particular outcome. And you'll add statements, as Sarah pointed out, about women, men, girls, and boys. You want to show who you're benefiting in these outcomes. So in your theory of change, you'll show who you're reaching, making sure that gender pops out there. You'll show who you're benefiting. And so when you're reviewing these, you'll go through each of these outcomes and see where appropriate is gender popping out in this outcome. And then at the impact level, we want to make sure that as appropriate, gender pops out as well. And this could be about empowerment. I mean, many different theories of change. It might be empowerment, it might be transformation, as you mentioned, transformation of gender norms. I don't know how your theories of change will roll out, but it should pop out, gender should pop out in all these tiers. Right there, I'm going to close this down and see what folks online have to say. We have, okay. Any comments, folks online? Okay.
Rena comment.
Oh yeah, Rena, that might be, let's see, I got it from Nancy. So, I mean, I made my own, but I'm on a advisory board for IFPRI, and Nancy Johnson just, yeah, this is it. The link that, the link that is on the CGIAR piece that Rena put in there. Oh, hers is a much nicer, much nicer model. But I've taken this and applied it to theory of change, and I think it will be very helpful for gender staff to think about this when you're asked to review theories of change, to think about that reach, benefit, and transformation, or empowerment, as the case may be.
Can I ask, so if you look at this screen, on the left where you have the income stream, there's much more gender calling out. And then if you look on the health and nutrition side, there's certainly less specific calling out of women. And as someone who works on that side of it, that makes sense to me because we're often just working with, we need to change gender norms and communities, but at the end of the day, a lot of the things that we do are to benefit women and their children.
So they're the impact group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but do you think, if you were presenting this, does there actually need to be more of that specific calling out to women? So should it be increased adoption of MCHN behaviours by men and women? Because maybe it's the men who aren't supportive of exclusive breastfeeding. So do you think that this one is really lacking, actually?
Well, what do you think? No. Let's take a look at this. How could we make gender pop out a little bit more on the right side of the screen? I love Liz's suggestion, right? Increase it, because right down here we're talking about care group leaders, mothers, fathers, grandparents, right? We've called out gender in the reach, which leads to improved access to community nutrition volunteers for the entire impact group, right? So we don't really need to call it out here, but I love what Sarah said. Should we add increased adoption of MCHN practices by?
But then I come back to thinking, well, it's everyone. Women and men need to have those increased practices. I don't know, like this is the sort of dialogue I often have when I'm thinking about the health and nutrition kind of outcomes in terms of, like, we don't actually, do we need to call out men and women, or is it just that actually everyone needs to be doing it? So, I don't know. But just when you look at it from here, you're like, yeah, this side's got a lot of calling out, and then the right side is just much more generic.
We've got maybe make more, what did Lauren say here?
Maybe make more explicit how the CG leaders will support the dialogues between between women and their partners.
Okay, yeah, and that would come out in your narrative, I think, more than the conceptual model, but it's a great point, Lauren.
But I mean, I think on this one, there's a big gap between, it's almost like this side have got less forgotten, you've just got behavioural outcome and then reduced incidence of adolescent pregnancy.
Oh, what? Well, this isn't fleshed out.
Yeah,
this side of the screen isn't even finished.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
I didn't realize I was tracking if that's also part of the...
Yeah, no. I pulled samples from the theory of change training because I didn't have any developed specifically for you guys. But no, great point. Yeah, this side needs some work. These guys went home at 5, and they'll be finishing this side of the model tomorrow. But that's a great question, though, to make sure that we're looking at all of our all of the branches of all of our causal pathways, right? For every purpose, you'll have a pathway of change. And that pathway of change, we can see this is linking, is what this is saying, is linking clear. It's a cross-causal, right? It's linking clear over here to purpose 2. But for each of these pathways of change, make sure that we haven't forgotten males and females. The tendency to focus on women in our nutrition pathway.
I also didn't realize until you pointed it out that this was intentionally understood.
Yeah, okay. Other comments? Thanks, Krista. Okay. So we're at 10:30 here. Do you have some ideas about how we can advocate or encourage gender staff to be more involved in this piece here, in the theory of change, in vetting this theory of change?
I think the gender staff usually want to be involved. I think sometimes they're there from the beginning, and I don't know if anyone else has experienced this, but I think you need to have leadership, anybody that's in any kind of leadership role, constantly, just consistently reinforcing the importance of that, those gender staff, like telling all the technical folks, you got to listen to them, you got to consider what they're saying, you know, and not just treating them as like a token, like you said, whether they're pulled in from the beginning or at the end. It's really important that they're listened to and really heard, because we've had, sometimes we bring in a gender consultant that's like the quiet person in the back of the room, or I've seen this on project teams especially. The gender advisor often is.
So what are some successful strategies that you have had for making that happen, that you could share? Some tips here for everyone, and any of you online. You heard Sarah's point. What are strategies to make that happen?
I wonder if having a gender person lead the kind of theory of change development, kind of, you know, when you sit down, you're putting the stickies on the wall, having the gender person kind of lead that so that they can say, okay, well, now you've got this, how does gender fit in? Because I think if they're part of the audience, then you've got to compete with everyone else. So I wonder if actually having the gender person facilitate that process might make people draw the link when they necessarily do.
Chelsea, we discussed when I was at the Theory of Change workshop that was just a couple weeks ago, and in all reality, you may not have a gender specialist sitting in on all of these sessions, even though we know it's important, but maybe having a gender champion, that somebody, even if they're not a gender specialist and understand gender completely, they can still be responsible and assigned to the topic of bringing it up periodically and making sure that people are on board with it, even though gender is maybe not their specialty, if they're just still bringing that conversation to light each time. That was something that was kind of discussed at the Theory of Change workshop, which I think is kind of a good idea. We have all of these champions of these different initiatives or these different projects that are going on, so having a gender champion as part of this process may work.
Who is closely linked to your gender advisor, right? Who is in close consultation.
Yeah.
Lauren is typing.
Okay, other
So
comments?
we know not to move on.
What was the one proposal that I worked on that wasn't a group of people, but it still was also, it was multisexual, was that because so there wasn't a theory of change, but the gender was a consultant, worked with each technical lead, and sat with them and went through the kind of what they developed and said, okay, it's kind of that retrofitting, but I think at the same time it does really benefit from, so you've thought the nutrition person thinks that they've addressed gender, but then the gender specialist comes in and says, actually, okay, this is what you need to pad out, and I think that really close back and forth means that you're kind of forced to take on what they're saying and all, like, it's not just like track comments, you know, so I think, again, it doesn't really necessarily, I mean, you could do it in the theory of change, but that was actually really useful for the whole proposal development when you had this really close, like, okay, we'll go through this section, this is where you need to call it out more, and this is the language you could use. I think that was very useful.
I think that's a great idea, and I think it would certainly work in a theory of change, because often what happens is, teams are working on their causal logic, and and sectoral teams do need to, even though we're building a comprehensive model, sectoral teams do need to drill down on a pathway to, they have that technical expertise, and so bringing the gender advisor in to work with each team would be very helpful.
And I think, for me, it was also good in terms of capacity building and kind of getting it, because my experience, especially on the health side, is that everyone, because we're all like, oh, we're helping women and children, in their health, we kind of think that we're already doing gender, and it's like, no, we're not. So having that capacity building means that the next time I was more able to be like, wait, no, like, let's consider this, and this is how we need to think about it. So I think that in the end is going to make everything stronger anyway.
Okay. Other comments? Folks online? Rebecca? Valerie?
I think it's important to hire staff too, that start from the onset and include the questions in your interviews. We've done that as well. We've got doc interview questions for every chief of party and deputy, even though M&E, and we kind of ask probing questions to see if they understand that gender is important and how do they see it playing out. So you've got that acceptance hopefully from the onset.
Right, that's so important, and if a project is specifically focused on gender as well, that the COP understands. All right, any other comments, ideas? It's interesting, Liz, that you mentioned having a gender advisor lead the theory of change process. I've never seen that happen, but I did actually work with World Vision developing their theory of change for Bangladesh, and the gender advisor had a gender consultant had a key role. There was a team, a small team leading the whole process, and the gender consultant was one of these top members driving the whole theory of change development from start to finish. And they ended up with a very good framework, I think, very good model. All right, well, the last piece, I think, where we want to make sure that gender folks are involved. Sorry, let me close this, and I don't quite have the knack yet of scrolling. Lauren, can you go to the next screen, please? I can't seem to access it. Is talk about the extent to which your staff are reviewing indicators for a theory of change. Now, some of these are required, right? We have the 8 for Food for Peace funded projects. We have the 8 gender indicators, and those will probably map somewhere on your theory of change. They'll map to some outcome. But in a theory of change, you need to have an indicator for every single outcome or output. There's usually just one output in that bottom tier. You have to have an indicator for all of those. They may or may not map to the required food for peace indicators. So teams have to, usually the M&E teams have to come up with indicators that show how you will test that outcome. So right now, to what extent are gender staff involved in reviewing indicators and making sure that if we have a TOC model, that, the model itself looks very gender aware and gender responsive, that the indicators, the metrics for testing our hypotheses are also gender aware.
For us, it varies. It can vary from proposal to proposal.
Can you speak up a little for folks online?
Sorry, I think it can vary from proposal to proposal, sometimes depending on who's the gender lead, or if we've brought in a consultant and the consultant's personality. Fun, sometimes. We've had gender advisors help in developing indicators, and sometimes they're brought in at the end, sometimes too late. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I think also having good M&E people, like our M&E team obviously is super comfortable working within the Food for Peace plan. model, so they know what they have to be tracking. And I think my experience has been that they're really good at saying, okay, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? Even without, with across the technical team. So I think they know what they're doing in the sense that they could track that for gender as well as any other of the technical areas. In the absence, if you had a gender consultant who'd gone away, like who wasn't, finished by the time they were getting to that phase. So I think it's kind of having, from my perspective, I think it's actually more about having a M&E advisor who really knows what you need to be doing and how to track those.
Okay. Valerie has a point. Valerie, do you still have a mic on, or shall I read your comment? She's talking about, for CRS, depending on the project, gender specialists might help develop the indicator, or at least review the M&E plan and the associated indicators. Is that true for any other organizations in the room?
This is Rebecca from ACD Avoca. So yes, I agree with both comments. I would say that if the gender specialist is not actually making the indicators, then they at least will review them. Our M&E department here at HQ is also very aware of the technical areas, and so generally, if they are working on changing the indicators or reviewing the indicator, PMP plan, they will consult with the technical area specialists, including gender, nutrition, things like that. So I feel like at least our departments work well together, but it may not be the case for other organizations.
Okay, thank you. And Christy, do you have comments?
Yes, the world.
Yes, just that we also have them work with us to review and contextualize any of the standard indicators from the donors, and then also to help us create any custom indicators that we might need to develop.
Okay, and I like that you brought up the custom indicators, because that links to a point Sarah Simons made earlier about monitoring risk and looking at whether gender-based violence is a result of particular interventions, or looking at other possible negative effects, right, that may impact a woman's time or her health or that of her children. And those types of indicators, that type of monitoring, may or may not show up in the theory of change because it's not linked to an outcome, right? It's not specifically going to determine whether or not we achieved an outcome. But putting that gender lens on and monitoring the risk, right? We're aware of this outcome, and we're aware, because of our expertise, of how there could be some negative impacts. So how do we monitor? It may not be an indicator that goes into the IPTT, but it's a project indicator that we're monitoring to ensure that we're not, catalyzing any negative effects. Do you have some examples of are those of you in the room monitoring risk, and any examples of the types of indicators we've come up with to ensure that the project outcome is not linked to, you called it unintended consequences.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if we've done that through indicators. No, I mean, you end up with so many required indicators that it's really...
It is tough.
We have a hard time, like our custom indicators tend to be sort of limited.
Right. And there are many, many indicators that are required that may not even map onto your theory of change.
Yeah.
So you're reporting on them, but they're not linked to anything in your models. So it is a challenge.
Yeah, I think in some of the projects that aren't turnkey projects, where we've had, if things arise, they sort of arise through kind of the more, quality assurance mechanisms, or, quarterly review meetings. Sorry. Through regular review, program staff talking to each other saying, oh, we're noticing that in this community, I mean, I can't think of anything, but, the examples you always hear about, like, people using scented soap, and then there's, like, an increase in gender-based violence. So that's not something that happened in our project, but, where there might be an unintended consequence, when they come up, regardless of whether it's related to gender or not, it comes up more organically, not necessarily through our monitoring and evaluation framework, and they're kind of then addressed in a project like, okay, well, how do we manage that? So,
Okay, good.
that certainly hasn't happened in any of our projects. It's just one of the examples that always comes to mind.
Rena or anybody else online? Comments? Okay, didn't mean to call you out there. Was commenting earlier starting this meeting about the challenge of hybrid meetings and people on the phone and people on Adobe and people in the room. So I just want to make sure that those of you online are not forgotten. The notes, as you probably noted after about the second page, I wasn't taking notes. I just couldn't handle having a conversation and paying attention and take the notes. So we will have notes for all of this. Lauren recorded it, and I'll type the notes up from that recording. But as we get ready to wrap it up, are there any other questions or concerns, areas you think we'd like to discuss in the next 3 gender analysis workshops as we move forward? I don't know if there's anything else about theory of change and gender specifically that we'd like to comment on in these last 10 minutes, or how we can integrate this into the next 3 workshops that Christy Tabai has planned.
What are the next 3 workshops going to be?
It's I think that one is what we know. One is based on the question what we know, what information we know. Another is what we don't know. I need to get that for you. I don't know. But
I mean, I guess one thing, I guess this might come up in what we know is, and I've worked on 3 years with the proposals now, is whether it's better to keep gender. I think this goes back to something I said at the beginning, like, is it better to have gender as a cross-cutting theme in your theory of change and results framework, or is it better to have it as a standalone? And there are pros and cons for both approaches, and I think that there have been successful programs with both approaches. Not only, I mean, I know with the Shuhado, I think in CARE is a really great example. I think everyone knows how well they did in gender there, and having that as a standalone result and purpose. I don't know, I think it was before we switched to purposes. So maybe a discussion of the pros and cons of doing that, because I think it's every year we kind of like, should we do it this way, should we do it that way? And I don't know, I guess NICE would be interesting to hear. I don't know if Food for Peace is really able to comment that way, but what their thinking is on which is what the pros and cons are. And I think sometimes it just comes down to the technical lead, the proposal development lead, the overall lead's decision to say, I think we need to go this way. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's just
okay.
How to address it
is
always challenging.
I just want to clarify that cross-cutting versus integrated, because just because in the past cross-cutting meant one little bubble under the results framework, and then gender didn't appear in any of the other, links. It was a very linear model, but I think cross-cutting is different than integrated. So the question about integrated or a standalone purpose.
I think this is a really good topic, because
I think when you have 1, livelihoods, 2, health, 3, resilience, and then 4, gender, all those things that you're going to do under gender and how you achieve them are really going to benefit the rest of the program. So in some ways you're like, oh, okay, well then it should be integrated and cross-cutting because it relates to everything. But at the same time, if you don't have it as that standalone with results and sub-IRs or whatever they call it, I always get confused. It just goes both ways. If you do it that way, then it doesn't look integrated, but if you do it the other way, then you risk losing it with all the other things that need to be addressed, and you have technical advisors who aren't interested. So that isn't always the case. I really struggle with that. And I think I don't know what other organizations are. Obviously, that's just my experience here in the last few years. But I think a discussion around or if you're going to do one, how can you ensure that it doesn't get lost? And if you're going to do it cross-cutting, how do you ensure it doesn't get lost? And if you're going to do it as a purpose, how do you ensure that it really does benefit the rest of the program? and how to relate that through the proposal
And that's why I
process.
think we just need some good models. I mean, I wouldn't go one way or the other. I've seen really dynamic models with
Yeah.
it as a standalone purpose. But the beauty of the theory of change is that it should be able to show, it would show those linkages to all the other purposes. So it would be integrated,
Yeah.
right? Then gender would be integrated because with your lines and arrows, you'd show the links. It would not be a standalone by
Yeah.
any mean. It would be a key area of focus.
Yeah.
But the idea is that all of these purposes we're looking for cross-causal. I mean, our theories of change is sometimes hard to read, but they're more realistic than those little skittle bubbles that just went this leads to this leads to this. So, and I would imagine it'll be good to get some, we'll try to get some food for peace feedback from Carla. But I imagine it just depends on the context.
Yeah.
I mean, Shaharda was pre-theory of change, but I would hardly say that gender component was standalone. I mean, gender was in every single purpose, in addition to it being its own SO.
Yeah.
So I haven't done the theory of change training, but I know this is a question I had. If you have, you have activities integrated throughout that have a gender lens, but then sometimes you're going to just have gender standalone activities, like men's groups or fathers groups. Not about agriculture necessarily, or nutrition, or life. It's just a gender activity. Does that mean if you've got standalone gender activities, do you need to represent that in a theory of change in a separate purpose? Or is it like, this was a question where we ended up sort of arguing for a standalone purpose in one proposal with integrated, so both, actually we opted for both integrated and standalone, but it was because precisely we had these standalone activities that didn't fit under one.
Where there was no
purpose or
definitive
SO.
link to that bottom tier of outcomes, is that?
No, because it was an activity or a series of activities over a year, 2 years, like through a group model, but that was really about gender behavior change. So it had things related to promoting women's adoption of certain technologies in agriculture, but also talking to men about family planning and reproductive health.
Yeah, I mean, I can't give you a definitive answer off the top of my head, but
and it might be more a food for peace question in terms of like how they like to see this.
well, and at the output level, you don't put all of your activities in a theory of change. It's that highest level, the culmination of everything you're doing, right? It's that highest level output. It's very concise. We don't have, your whole dip or your whole in a theory of change. It's that if you think about it as the output that, if achieved, is enough to set those wheels of change in motion. They would result in an outcome. So that level of detail may or may not be represented in the theory of change. I don't.
Or say like trainings in a community or with law enforcement, or things that are not sectoral in nature, for example, that don't easily fall into the standard 3.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it needs to link. I mean, pretty much every intervention output in a theory of change needs to link to some outcome. So you should have somehow have an outcome there. Otherwise, you run into the piece of people pulling activities out of their back pocket and say, we're good at this. We're really good at this with value chains, so we're going to do value chains. Like, there's no link to this in your hypothesis. There is nothing that says value chains are essential in this model. And I'm just using this as an example, but the whole purpose of a theory of change is to help you select the interventions that are most necessary to start the wheels of change in motion. So if you know this is necessary, there should be some kind of outcome that it links to in the model.
Yeah.
And that, I would think,
The
if
outcome might
it's,
just serve
I mean,
two
I can
purposes.
see, of course, I mean, it could, improved gender norms related to decision making. I mean, I can see that many tentacles. It would then hit health. It would then hit, you know, asset ownership. I mean, but that's what a theory of change is about. We don't have one line. We might have
So is
four.
that what you consider the cross-cutting purpose?
It wouldn't. I don't know. I think, Sarah, it's hard to say without looking. Yeah. Yeah, no, you do. I mean, well, yeah, you do. I like you do. But I think it's just hard for me to comment on without.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, other folks online. I know some folks have dropped off, but any other final comments or things you'd like to see addressed in this top series of gender analysis workshops?
Lori, this is Rena.
Yes, Rena.
Hi. So just if the remaining workshops are going to mirror the 4 questions that were introduced in the July gender analysis workshop, which I think is we're just trying to move the conversation forward. One thing that did come up, and I thought I'd just highlight it in the feedback that we received, the 2 areas were, you know, this notion of how to integrate gender into the theory of change, which I think we've addressed today, but there was another piece of it in that last question, or what are you going to do differently programmatically to address what you learned from the gender analysis, linking back to specific suggestions for how to then go back and refine the theory of change. They wanted to see more on that. So just highlighting that if there's a way to, you know, have you and Christy sort of maybe lead that session so that you can give ideas on, okay, now you have your gender analysis findings, so how do you go back and refine the theory of change? That discussion, they wanted to see more.
Thank you very much, Rena. That's a great suggestion, and I propose that we take a day to do that versus 2 hours, because I mean, really, I mean, I'd like to just put a theory of change up on the wall, bring in some data, and say this is what you know, just have a mock, just simulate the process, because I think we'll get a lot further with that type of workshop than sitting around here discussing it. You know, bring in your theories of change. If everybody, you know, not everyone, but if 4 of us could bring in a theory of change, if we could blow it up, get it on the wall, and then really talk about what do we do with this new information? Let's modify these. How does this need to be adjusted? I think that's a stellar idea, Rena. And I'll talk to Christy about it, but I would advocate for, you know, more time, because I think we just walk away feeling frustrated if we sat here and had a conceptual discussion about how to do it. I think we just need to do it. It's a question, you know, I won't say plaguing, that's a little strong, but it's throughout all sectors. Everyone wants to know, how are we testing and modifying this? And the 2 of the next 4 theory of change workshops here at Save the Children will be focused on testing and validating. They won't be, you know, specifically related to the gender analysis, but more the, like, let's say the refine and implement model. We have a lot of information now. Here's the theory of change we proposed. Here's a lot of new information. Now what? How do we modify? So that's a start, and those will be, you know, 3 to 4 day workshops. But I like your idea of really just honing in on gender and thinking about how do we refine the theory of change based on our gender analysis. It'd be great. I mean, how many of you have a theory of change and you have a gender analysis that's from the same project? You have your initial theory of change model that was sent in with the proposal, and you also have your gender analysis. Sarah, 1, 2, okay. Sarah and Liz are not the same project?
Is it because gender analysis were only recently required? I don't know the sort of piece history behind them.
Okay. Do you know, Chelsea?
I don't know. Yeah, we've been involved in it.
Jerusalem?
We're together.
The same project. Yeah. Okay. Christy, do you know?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, you do. Well, it's something to consider if you'd be willing to share. I don't know. Again, I don't know how willing people are to share their models and share their analysis, but that would.
We've already shared our theory of change for Sabal, and the gender analysis is public already on the deck. So I think probably
Sabal would be a good one to work. Anyway, it's food for thought. I know Christy's got the next 3 workshops planned, and as Irina said, I think it might logically fall after those 3. So we have 4 or 5 months till we get to it. But if you can consider that and talk to the folks who, Chelsea, maybe you can look at Malawi and see. They didn't have a theory of change though, I don't think. So they have the gender analysis, but not the theory of change. Anyway, I think that'd be the best way to go about it. It's 11 o'clock. Thanks to everyone for the rich contributions you made and for your patience with the hybrid mode of this meeting, particularly those of you online. And I think you'll hear from Christy Tabai on when the next mini workshop is held. Okay. Thanks, Rena. Take care.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lauren, for teching it. Somebody take a